Subscribe to the channel and comment below which SCP story you want to hear next. And don't forget to hit the bell for more stories like this.
Final audio log of the administrator. The date no longer matters. If you are hearing this, it means the succession has taken place. My seat on the council is empty, and death has finally claimed what was left of me. Do not expect an eloquent speech or a heroic retrospective of my years of service. The truth is, there is no heroism in the shadows where we live. There is only duty. A duty so heavy, it crushes the soul and turns it to stone, one layer at a time, until you forget the man who once existed. This is not a record for the archives. It is a confession, and there is only one sin for which I must seek absolution, not from any god, but from history itself. We lie. That is the foundational truth of the Foundation. We tell lies to the public so they can sleep peacefully. We tell lies to our own staff so they can carry out their orders with a clear conscience. And we tell lies to ourselves so we can face our reflection in the morning. Secure, contain, protect. What a convenient farce. A mantra to justify the unjustifiable. How many lives have we sacrificed? How many minds have we broken? How many realities have we rewritten to keep our own intact? We are the jailers of the impossible, the wardens of nightmares, and we have built the walls of our reality with the bricks of horror and denial. Over nearly a century, I have seen things that defy language, star-eating entities, paradoxes that unravel logic like a loose thread on a sweater, machines that think, gods that bleed. I have authorized procedures that condemned men to fates worse than death, and classified objects whose mere existence is an affront to sanity. I have carried the weight of every decision, every life lost, every protocol we wrote with the blood of others. But one burden, just one, refuses to let me rest. One secret so corrosive that even the silence of the grave seems an insufficient refuge from its grasp. This recording is about it, about our greatest failure, masked as our most vital containment procedure. It is about the truth behind the designation that, to this day, makes the most hardened members of the O5 Council look away. It is about the final proof that there are evils in the universe for which containment is just a prolonged form of defeat, a way to postpone the apocalypse by one more day at the cost of our own humanity. Before my name becomes just another dusty footnote in the Foundation's history, the truth must be spoken, if only to this tape that no one should ever hear. I dare not speak the name of the procedure aloud, even here, alone in this sterile room that will become my mausoleum. The very act of giving it voice feels like an invocation, an invitation for the darkness it holds at bay to look back at me. Montauk, even in my mind, the word tastes of ash and primordial guilt. It is our original sin, the indelible stain on the soul of the Foundation. And for you, my successor, to understand why it exists, you must understand the full story, not the sanitized, redacted version that rests on our most secure servers. You must understand the horror from which it was born. The story does not begin with an anomaly, but with a crime, or what we thought was a crime. 6 young girls missing from 6 different cities on 6 consecutive days. The local police were lost. The national media was beginning to whip itself into a frenzy. Our data-crawling algorithms, ever watchful for patterns that suggest the anomalous, flagged the case. There was a frightening symmetry to the disappearances, a ritualistic precision that caught our attention. At first, it was designated a low-level case, possibly related to an extremist group of interest. We sent an investigative team, Mobile Task Force Zeta-9, the Mole Rats, not to fight, but to observe and report. The cult's name was as melodramatic as their deeds, the Crimson Daughter. Their writings, found on obscure internet forums and in leftover pamphlets, spoke of a birth that would silence the world and the coronation of the Scarlet King. It was the usual mix of apocalyptic theology and outright insanity that we see so often. We dismissed much of it as delusion, a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. We underestimated their faith, or rather, we underestimated the power of the thing they had faith in. We believed we were dealing with fanatics, when in fact they were merely the priests of a much older, hungrier horror. Zeta 9 tracked the seventh victim, a young woman named, her name cannot be spoken. Her identity was purged from all records, an act of mercy she would never know she received. They tracked her to an abandoned complex in the middle of nowhere, an old farmstead that reeked of decay and something else, something fundamentally wrong. The first field reports from the team leader were tense but professional. He described subtle, non-Euclidean architecture within the main barn, symbols that caused headaches and nausea when observed directly. It was the standard pattern, the beginning of the veil tearing. Then, communication became fragmented. The audio began to pick up whispers that did not belong to the agents. The leader of Zeta 9, a veteran of 20 years, started to stammer in his transmissions. He spoke of a sound like something breaking, but it isn't here. He described the sight of the bodies of the other 6 girls, arranged in a circular pattern. There were no signs of conventional violence. They were empty husks, as if something had been taken from them, something more fundamental than life itself. The horror was not in their death, but in the process that led to it. It was at that point that the O5 Council took direct control of the operation. The suspicion of a Keter-class anomaly was now a certainty. We authorized the dispatch of a full combat force, Mobile Task Force New 7, Hammer Down, with orders to secure the site at any cost. But before they could arrive, Zeta 9 made the final discovery. In the center of the circle of bodies, they found her, the 7th girl, SCP-231-7, as the world would come to know her. She was alive, catatonic, but physically unharmed. For a moment, a single, foolish moment, we thought we had saved someone. That moment of relief lasted for exactly 12 seconds. That was how long it took for an agent's Geiger counter to start screaming, not with gamma radiation, but with a form of energy our sensors couldn't even classify. It was Akiva radiation, the energy of divinity, of creation, but it was corrupted, inverted. The air around the girl began to distort. The agents reported the barn walls seemed to breathe, and the dried blood on the floor formed shifting, writhing pattern, as if trying to spell out warnings in a forgotten tongue. The Zeta 9 leader approached her, an act of compassion that sealed his fate. On his final audio transmission, his voice is a terrified whisper. He said, "My God, it's inside her. We didn't save her. We armed her." And then, the scream, a scream that was not human, but it came from his mouth, followed by the sound of flesh and bone being remade into something new and unholy. We lost contact with Zeta 9. When New 7s arrived, the barn was gone. In its place was only a crater of blackened glass, and in the center, the girl, sitting up, her eyes open and empty, humming a tune that did not belong in this world. She was the anomaly, not the cult, not the ritual. They were merely the catalyst. The horror was what she carried inside her, an entity, or an event, or both, that the Crimson Daughters ritual was designed to bring to term. The other 6 victims had been the failed stages, the preparatory sacrifices. She was the 7th seal, the final vessels. And by interrupting the ritual at the last moment, by killing the cultists before they could complete whatever final step was required, we did not prevent the apocalypse. We merely placed it in a state of indefinite suspension, a trigger waiting to be pulled. The first days of her containment were absolute chaos. We brought her to Site 19, a mistake that nearly cost us the entire facility. Her mere proximity caused containment breaches in other anomalies. SCP-682 went into an unprecedented rage, screaming in its cell about the abomination and the sullied birth. SCP-079, the AI, began outputting malicious code that translated to prayers for the Scarlet King. She was a magnet for chaos, a beacon of entropy that drew darkness to her like a moth to a flame. We tried everything to understand the nature of the entity within her. Psychic probes resulted in the instantaneous brain death of 3 of our best telepaths. Tissue analysis came back as biologically human, but ontologically impossible. Every attempt to study her seemed to accelerate the process. Small, localized earthquakes, fluctuations in the Hubble constant, manifestations of phenomena that defied the laws of physics. We were staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, with no idea how sensitive the trigger was. The panic within the O5 Council was palpable. For the first time, many of us felt the true fear of failure. The first major breach occurred 1 week after her arrival. One of the researchers assigned to her case, a Dr. Glass, a brilliant and skeptical woman, suffered a complete psychotic break. After observing her for 3 hours through reinforced glass, she began to claw out her own eyes, screaming about the 7 chains and that the 7th was about to break. Before she could be subdued, SCP-231-7's containment cell itself began to dissolve, the steel walls transmuting into a pulsating, organic substance. It was a small-scale reality restructuring event. The response was immediate and brutal. New 7 was sent in, not to contain, but to terminate. The termination order was given by me. For the first time in Foundation history, we authorized the use of a tactical nuclear device inside one of our own facilities. The target was the Keter containment sector. It was a drastic measure, a sacrifice of hundreds of staff and dozens of other anomalies to prevent a potential XK-class scenario. The warhead was armed. We were 90 seconds from detonation when O5-4, the only theologian among us, screamed to abort. She claimed to have found something in the recovered fragments of the cult's writings, a text that did not speak of birth, but of postponement, a counter-ritual, a way not to remove the entity, but to appease it, to keep it in its gestational state. It was a desperate gamble based on the interpretation of a text written by madmen, but the alternative was nuclear annihilation, with the chance that not even that would be enough to destroy the entity. We aborted the detonation with 30 seconds to spare, and we gave O5 carte blanche to develop her procedure. Thus was born the monster we call Procedure 110 Montauk. It was not an act of science or logic, but of abject desperation. O5-4 and her team locked themselves away with the profane texts of the Crimson Daughter, working against the clock as the reality tremors around SCP-2317 grew stronger and more frequent. They were not creating a containment protocol. They were attempting to decipher and replicate the darkest part of the cult's own ritual, a section that seemed to describe a continuous cycle of trauma and suffering to keep the entity slumbering. The moral implications were terrifying. O5-4 herself, a woman of devout faith, seemed to age a decade for every day she spent on the project. Her reports to the council became more and more disturbing. She spoke of the need to inflict a specific pain, a psychological and physical horror of such a magnitude that it would overwhelm the entity's will to be born. The logic was perverse but undeniable. The original ritual used suffering to fuel the birth. Perhaps a different suffering applied continuously would poison the well and keep it from overflowing. It was a monstrous theory. The first attempt to apply a preliminary version of Montauk was a disaster. We used D-class personnel, following a script of actions that still makes my stomach churn. The result was a psychic shockwave that killed everyone in the containment wing except for the girl. She remained untouched, but the entity within her seemed stronger, more awake. We learned the hard way that the nature of the act was as important as the act itself. It wasn't just about causing pain. It had to be a specific kind of desecration, a violation so fundamental that reality itself recoiled from it. That was when we realized the cruelest truth. The ritual required a degree of intent and belief that D-class, acting under duress, could not provide. It needed to be performed by someone who understood what they were doing, even if they didn't believe in the theology behind it. It needed Foundation personnel, trained, dedicated, committed to the mission, no matter how vile. The proposal to use Level 4 staff, our best and most loyal, to perform an act of continuous depravity, nearly split the O5 Council in two. The debate lasted for 72 uninterrupted hours. The air in our meeting room was thick with arguments of ethics, pragmatism, and the very purpose of our existence. Some argued for termination, claiming that becoming the monsters who carried out this ritual was too high a price to pay. Others, led by me, argued that the survival of humanity outweighed the moral purity of a handful of agents. It was a cold, terrible calculus to save the world at the cost of our souls. In the end, the vote was 7-6 in favor of the procedure. The Foundation changed that day. What idealism some of us still harbored died in that voting room. We crossed a line from which there was no return. We began recruiting personnel for Procedure 110 Montauk. The selection process was, and still is, the most rigorous in the Foundation. We look for a specific combination of psychological resilience, absolute loyalty, and a certain capacity for compartmentalization, an ability to commit unspeakable acts and then file them away in a mental box never to be opened again. The first Montauk team was formed from volunteers from NU7 who had been at the Barnes crater. They had seen firsthand what would happen if we failed. They carried the trauma of that day, and it was this trauma that made them effective. They performed the procedure, and for the first time since we brought her into the Foundation, the reality tremors stopped. The Akiva radiation sensors stabilized. It worked. The silence that followed was the most deafening sound I have ever heard. The sound of our own damnation being postponed for another day. The final containment cell was designed based on the sickening principles we had uncovered. It is not just made of steel and concrete. It is lined with alloys blessed by rituals from 7 different faiths to create a theological dissonance. The sound system does not pipe in white noise, but recordings of silence from lifeless locations, creating an auditory vacuum. The lighting is kept at a spectrum proven to induce feelings of abandonment and isolation in the human brain. Every single detail of the cell is a psychological weapon aimed at its occupant. The procedure itself, the official file states the details are classified. This is a lie. The truth is, there is no file. The details have never been written down. They are passed orally from one Montauk team leader to the next. To write them down would be to give them a permanence, a reality outside of that room that we cannot risk. It would be like writing the instruction manual for the end of the world. The only protection we have is forgetfulness, denial, the absolute secrecy that shrouds that act every 24 hours. Many ask why we do not sedate her, why we don't keep her in an induced coma. We tried in the early days. We tried everything: general anesthetics, neurological blockers, cryogenic stasis. Every attempt to suppress her consciousness was met with an exponential escalation of anomalous activity. The entity seems to interpret unconsciousness as a weakness of the host, an invitation to emerge. She must be conscious. She must perceive. That is the central, most sadistic mechanic of her containment. Her awareness is the battlefield. The human cost has been astronomical. Personnel assigned to Montauk have the highest rate of turnover, suicide, and psychotic breakdown in the entire Foundation. They are called heroes, given the Foundation's Medal of Honor, but they are broken, haunted heroes. We subject them to Class A amnestics after every tour of duty, but some memories are so traumatic they refuse to be erased. They come back in nightmares, in flashbacks. We see it in the tremors in their hands, the emptiness in their eyes. They are the living sacrifices on the altar of our survival. I personally oversaw the selection of the first 5 teams. I read every psychological file, interviewed every candidate. I sent them into that hell. I shake their hands. When they come out, tell them that humanity is grateful, and then I sign the order to have their memories wiped. It is a hypocrisy that eats me alive. I am the architect of their suffering, the high priest of this profane ritual that ensures the sun will rise tomorrow. What kind of man does that make me? A savior or a monster, even greater than the one we are trying to contain? There were attempts to find a permanent solution, black projects with names like Archangel and Golgotha. We tried to develop theological countermeasures, ontic weaponry, surgical procedures to remove the entity without killing the host. Every attempt failed spectacularly. Project Archangel resulted in the manifestation of 6 hostile entities. each corresponding to one of the cult's dead victims, which had to be neutralized at the cost of an entire task force. The horror she contains seems to actively defend itself against any attempt to eradicate it. Project Golgotha was the most audacious attempt. The plan was to transfer the entity from SCP-231-7 to an alternate host, a brain-dead cloned body, which could then be launched into the sun. We used technology recovered from SCP-2000 and soul transference rituals deciphered from ancient texts. For a moment, it seemed to work. The girl's vitals normalized. A Kiva radiation began to emanate from the clone, and then the clone exploded. Not with physical force, but with conceptual force. It erased the very idea of cloning from a 3-kilometer radius, unmaking teams and equipment. The reality is that we are trapped in a perpetual cycle. Procedure 110 Montauk is not a solution. It is a sentence for her, for the personnel who perform it, and for us who order it. It is the sickening engine that keeps the world turning. We found her when she was a child, a scared girl in a dark barn, and for decades, we have kept her in that state of terror, cultivating her suffering like a gardener tends a poisonous plant because we are afraid of the fruit it might bear. I sometimes wonder what is left of her, of the person she was. Is there any spark of self behind the trauma and the horror, some part of her that remembers her name, her family, a time before the cult, before us? Or are we just another layer of the nightmare for her? The reports are clinical and inhuman. Subject responded to procedure as expected. Containment stability has been maintained. They never mention the sound of the silent weeping that the microphones pick up for hours after the team leaves. The initial horror of the discovery was visceral, the fear of the unknown, but the horror I feel now is different. It is a cold, intellectual horror, the horror of knowing exactly what we are doing and knowing that we have no other choice. It is the horror of complicity. The Crimson Daughter wanted to use her suffering to give birth to an unholy god. We use her suffering to keep that god in chains. Who is more monstrous, the cultist who worships the demon, or the jailer who tortures it to keep the world safe? I no longer have the answer. The debates over her classification were the most heated in the Council's history. She did not fit neatly into any of our boxes. Safe was a joke. Euclid was a dangerous understatement. Keter was obvious, but it felt inadequate. A few of us proposed a new class, a class just for her. Apollyon, the Destroyer, an anomaly that cannot be permanently contained and will, inevitably, destroy the world. The proposal was voted down as being defeatist, but deep down, we all know it's the truth. The final designation as Keter was an act of self-denial. It was our way of telling the universe and ourselves that we were still in control, that this was just another monster in a box, a difficult but manageable problem, a lie, a necessary lie, to maintain the morale of the Foundation, to prevent mass panic among our own researchers. But here, on this tape, the truth can be spoken. She is not Keter, she is the doomsday clock, and we are the terrified men who wind it every single day. I remember seeing her image once, just once. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I ordered the live video feed to be patched to my private terminal. I needed to see. I needed to understand the face to which we had sentenced so much horror. What I saw was not a monster. It was a young woman with the oldest, most tired eyes I have ever seen on any living being. Eyes that had seen the abyss and had become the abyss. I shut the feed off after 5 seconds and threw up in my office waste bin. I never asked to see again. The horror of the discovery in that barn was only the prologue. It was the first page of a book we should never have opened. Every step we have taken since, every decision, every attempt at control, has only sunk us deeper into the sick narrative that the cult began. They wrote the play. We have merely taken over the lead roles. We are the unwilling protagonists of their apocalypse, performing the final act every night in an endless loop, waiting for the day we miss our cue and the curtains fall on the world. The initial success of Procedure 110 Montauk brought no celebration. There was only a cold, profound sense of dread. We had confirmed our worst fears. The monstrous logic of the cultists was sound. We had stared into the abyss of their methodology and found it to be functional. That first night, after the team had been escorted away for psychological evaluation and amnestics, I sat alone, watching the stable vital signs on the monitor. The silence from her cell was no longer a sign of peace, but a testament to our newly minted damnation. We had not found a cure. We had merely learned the precise rhythm of the disease, a rhythm that would now dictate the life of this foundation. We tried to find a more humane path, of course. In the early months, we ran dozens of theoretical models and even a few disastrous practical experiments. One such initiative, Project Elysium, was predicated on the hypothesis that any strong emotional input could keep the entity dormant. We attempted to surround her with stimuli designed to elicit joy and peace. We filled her cell with beautiful art, played serene classical music, and even introduced a therapy animal, a golden retriever. The result was a catastrophic failure. The entity did not just resist the positive emotions, it fed on them, converting them into a more potent form of Akiva radiation. The dog suffered a fatal seizure, and the paintings began to weep blood. That failure taught us a crucial, horrifying lesson. The entity was not merely held at bay by suffering, it specifically required a state of terror and despair in its host to remain quiescent. Joy, hope, love. These were not antithetical to its nature, they were accelerants. It was as if the entity existed in a state of inverted morality, where our virtues were its nourishment. This discovery slammed the door on any gentler containment protocols. We were left with only the grim, dark path that 054 had first illuminated for us. The path of Montauk was not just one option among many, it was the only one that didn't actively hasten the end of the world. The psychological toll on the Montauk personnel became our next great crisis. The first team, despite being composed of hardened veterans, began to show signs of severe psychological erosion within weeks. Even with the amnestic, we learned that you cannot simply erase an act of that magnitude. It leaves a stain on the soul, a conceptual residue that memory wiping cannot reach. We had to create an entirely new branch of the Foundation's psychological division, one dedicated solely to the mental and spiritual decontamination of Montauk staff. They are given cover stories, new identities, and quiet retirements, but we know they are never truly whole again. This constant, brutal expenditure of human souls led to the most significant schism in the O5 Council's history. The debate was no longer about whether Montauk worked, but whether the Foundation had the right to demand such a price. O5-6, a former human rights lawyer who had been one of our most fervent ethicists, became the voice of the opposition. He argued that our mission was to protect humanity, not just the biological species, but the very concept of it. He claimed that in performing Montauk, we were sacrificing the very thing we swore to protect, becoming a mirror image of the monsters we fought. I, along with O5-7, a ruthless pragmatist who had once run our wetwork operations, led the counter-argument. My position was simple, and to me, unassailable. What good are ethics, morality, or the soul of humanity when an interdimensional god fetus devours the planet? There can be no humanity without humans. There can be no morality without a world for it to exist in. We were surgeons, and the patient was on the table, bleeding out. The procedure was gruesome, sickening, and would scar us forever, but the alternative was the patient's death. It was a choice between a tainted life and a clean death. I chose life. The arguments grew venomous. 056 accused us of becoming the Scarlet King's high priests, carrying out his will under the guise of containment. He brought forth psych reports, recordings of personnel weeping during their amnestic treatments, evidence of the spiritual rot at the heart of our most critical operation. 057, in turn, presented projections of the XK class event, timelines of planetary dissolution, the screaming audio logs of the Zeta 9 team. He asked 056 if he was willing to trade the lives of 8 billion people for the moral comfort of a dozen agents per month. It was a brutal, ugly affair that laid bare the core conflict of our mission. Ultimately, as I told you, the vote was 7-6, but the story doesn't end there. The day after the vote, 05-6 and 05-11, his closest ally, tendered their resignations. They were not allowed to simply walk away, of course. Their knowledge was too vast, their clearance too high. They were given a comfortable, permanent retirement at a secure, undisclosed location where they reside to this day, their voices silenced, but their dissent echoing in the Council's history. Their departure consolidated power in the hands of the pragmatists. The Foundation became harder, colder, and perhaps more effective, but something essential was lost that day. With the ethical debate settled by attrition, we turned our focus to refining the doctrine of containment. Our goal became twofold: ensure the procedure never fails and insulate the rest of the Foundation from its moral toxicity. This led to the creation of the Montauk Protocol's infamous secrecy. We decreed that no record of the procedure's specifics would ever be created. It would exist only in the minds of the men and women who performed it. A mimetic ghost passed from one generation of personnel to the next. This was not just for security, it was to quarantine the idea itself, to prevent its horror from spreading. We also began a series of black projects aimed at finding an alternative, any alternative, that would allow us to cease the procedure. Project Hephaestus was our first major attempt. The concept was to create a fully automated system, an array of robotic arms and instruments that could perform the procedure without human involvement. We spent billions designing a system that could perfectly replicate the physical actions required. We believed that by removing the human element, we could remove the moral cost. The machine was a marvel of engineering, precise and relentless. It failed completely. The entity did not respond. The Akiva radiation levels began to climb steadily as the automated procedure was carried out. The machine performed the actions, but it lacked the crucial component: intent, malice. The cold, precise cruelty of the machine was not the same as the hot, desperate cruelty of a human being forcing themselves to commit an atrocity for the greater good. It was a horrifying revelation. The procedure was not just a series of actions, it was a ritual that required a human soul, a will, to be its engine. The suffering of the performer was as necessary as the suffering of the subject. The failure of Project Hephaestus solidified the human element as a permanent, non-negotiable part of the containment. It also led to new security measures for the cell itself. The access panel was redesigned to require not just a keycard and a password, but a live biosignature reading, a blood sample, and a psychological stress level analysis. The door to her cell will literally not open for a machine or for a person whose heart is not racing with the specific kind of dread that comes from knowing what they are about to do. The system ensures that only a willing, terrified human can enter. Our next major failure was Project Morpheus. If we could not automate the physical, perhaps we could control the psychological. The project brought together our top 1 irologists and telepaths to design a dream prison. The goal was to use psychic resonance technology to force SCP-2317 into a lucid dream state and then trap the entity's consciousness within a constructed narrative, a mental labyrinth from which it could not escape. It was an elegant, sophisticated concept, our best hope for a non-violent solution. Project Morpheus nearly destroyed Site-06. The moment our specialists made psychic contact, the entity hijacked the connection. It did not just resist the dream prison, it inverted it. The carefully constructed labyrinth became a broadcast tower, sending a mimetic contagion back up the psychic link. The honorologists began screaming, clawing at their own skulls, their minds flooded with the entity's nascent thoughts. They described impossible colors, geometric shapes that caused madness, and a single, recurring sound, a vast, slow heartbeat that echoed across a scarlet sea. We had to perform an emergency psychic amputation, severing the connection and quarantining the entire research team. 3 of them were left permanently catatonic, their minds erased by the raw, unformed consciousness of the entity. We learned that its mind was not something that could be contained or reasoned with. It was a weapon. Its very thoughts were a mimetic hazard of the highest order. This failure directly led to the installation of the mimetic dampeners and the auditory vacuum system in her cell, designed to suppress any potential psychic or mimetic overflow from her subconscious. Every single element of her final containment chamber is a scar, a monument to one of our failures. The multi-faith blessed alloys lining the walls, they were developed after an incident where the entity began manifesting religious stigmata that corresponded to the faith of a nearby researcher, causing localized reality failure. We found that a cacophony of conflicting blessings created a kind of static that interfered with this ability. It's theological warfare, using mismatched beliefs as a shield against a being that seems to weaponize faith itself. The seismic dampeners beneath the floor were installed after a minor breach where her agitation caused a 4.5 magnitude earthquake localized entirely within the containment wing. We discovered her connection to the entity gave her a subtle but measurable influence over telluric forces. The dampeners don't stop her from trying, they just absorb the tremors, preventing the entire site from being shaken to pieces every time the procedure is delayed by even a few minutes. We are not containing her. We are containing a localized, perpetual, natural disaster. Even the nutritional slurry she is fed through a tube is part of the containment. It is a carefully balanced formula, completely devoid of any ingredients that have ever been associated with religious ceremonies, fertility rites, or celebrations of any culture. No wine, no bread, no salt, no honey. We analyzed thousands of historical and occult texts to create a diet of pure sustenance without a single shred of symbolic meaning. We cannot risk her ingesting something that the entity might interpret as a sacrament. It is a level of paranoia that would be insane in any other context. The classification debate resurfaced after these failures, more intense than ever. The Apollyon classification was proposed again, this time with more support. O5-2 argued that calling her Cater was a lie that was actively endangering the Foundation. He stated that the manageable Cater designation fostered a false sense of security, encouraging projects like Morpheus and Hephaestus that only served to provoke the entity. He claimed that classifying her as Apollyon, as uncontainable, was the only responsible choice, as it would force us to accept that Montauk was our only tool and focus all our resources on ensuring its flawless, perpetual execution. His argument was compelling. The evidence of our failures was undeniable. We were not making progress towards a permanent solution. We were merely learning more and more ways in which we could fail. Each new experiment revealed another layer of her horrifying capability. Each attempt to build a better cage only showed us how much bigger the monster was than we had initially believed. We were like children trying to dam a tsunami with sandcastles, celebrating each time a wave didn't immediately wash our work away, ignoring the rising tide. Yet, the motion failed again. This time, the reason was more subtle. It was about morale, not just for the Foundation at large, but for the Montauk personnel themselves. To officially classify SCP-231 as Apollyon would be to officially state that their sacrifice was hopeless, that they were not fighting for a future victory, but merely delaying an inevitable defeat. How do you ask a man to walk into that room day after day if you tell him that the war is already lost? The Cater classification, as dishonest as it may be, provides a sliver of hope, and for the men and women performing Montauk, that sliver is all they have. So, we live the lie. We maintain the Cater classification. We file the reports. We write the budgets for research into alternative containment, even though most of us on the council know it's a futile gesture. It's a performance, a piece of theater we put on for the rest of the Foundation to maintain the fiction that we are in control, that this is just another problem to be solved, another anomaly to be understood and locked away. The truth is that we solved the problem on the day we approved Montauk. The solution was just as monstrous as the problem itself. The analysis of the entity's nature has never truly progressed beyond those first frantic weeks. We know what it responds to, but not what it is. Is it the Scarlet King himself, or one of his children, a herald? Is it even a sentient being in the way we understand it, or more like a natural force, a law of physics from another reality that was improperly introduced into ours? We have terabytes of data, sensor readings, psychic feedback, but it all amounts to looking at the shadow of a mountain and trying to describe the mountain itself. We are missing the fundamental context. The debate over terminating her, simply killing her, and facing the consequences has never truly gone away. It lingers in the background of every O5 meeting, the unspoken, terrible option. Periodically, a new council member, horrified by the reality of Montauk, will formally propose it. They argue that a quick end, even an apocalyptic one, is more merciful than this perpetual living hell. They argue that humanity should face its extinction with dignity, not by committing daily atrocities to postpone it. These proposals are always defeated. The reason is simple, and it is the ultimate expression of our mission. The Foundation does not yield. We do not allow the end. Our purpose is to secure, contain, and protect, and that mandate has no expiration date. It does not say, protect until it becomes too difficult, or contain until it becomes too ugly. We will hold the line. We will perform the procedure. We will sacrifice our staff, our ethics, and our souls to give humanity one more sunrise, even if that sunrise is a lie bought with an unforgivable sin. We once tried to communicate with her, not with her precisely, but with the person she once was, Project Lazarus. It was a foolish, sentimental endeavor, championed by a junior researcher who believed there might be a way to reawaken the host personality and have it help us fight the entity from within. We used a low-contact mimetic agent designed to trigger early childhood memories. We showed her images of her home, played recordings of her parents' voices. For one moment, her eyes cleared, a single tear rolled down her cheek, and she whispered one word, "Why?" The moment her original consciousness surfaced, the entity reacted with extreme violence. The Akiva radiation spiked to levels we had never seen before. The very atoms of her containment cell began to vibrate, threatening to come apart. It was clear the entity viewed the host's personality as a rival, a threat to its own existence. Any spark of the girl she used to be was a danger to containment. We were forced to administer a powerful amnestic to suppress her identity once more, pushing her back down into the darkness. We learned that to contain the monster, we had to kill the person. This is the core of the doctrine. The containment of SCP-231 is not the containment of a monster inside a girl. It is the meticulous and systematic destruction of the girl to imprison the monster. We must keep her in a state of pure, unthinking terror, a state devoid of hope, memory, or identity. Her humanity is the enemy of our survival. Every aspect of the procedure of her environment is designed to grind down any remnant of her personhood, to leave only a terrified vessel that the entity within cannot properly use. The justification for each element of the containment is therefore a story of horror. The constant 24-hour surveillance is not just for security, it's to eliminate any concept of privacy, a fundamental human need. The lack of any human contact outside of the procedure is to foster absolute isolation. The procedure itself is the final, brutal tool, a daily reassertion of hopelessness and despair, resetting the clock on her spirit just as it resets the clock on the apocalypse. It is a finely tuned engine of psychological annihilation. And who am I in this story? I am the chief engineer. I am the one who stood before the council and argued that this engine must be built. I am the one who rationalized the monstrosity, who wrapped it in the language of necessity and pragmatism. The other council members can hide behind the vote, behind the collective decision, but I was its champion. My voice was the loudest, my arguments the most forceful. This entire doctrine of containment, this living hell we have constructed, rests squarely on my shoulders. It is my legacy. This is why this recording is necessary, because the official files will only show the success, the stable containment, the averted XK-class scenarios. They will not show the price. They will not show the faces of the agents we have broken. They will not show the empty eyes of the girl in the cell. They will not record the sound of our souls corroding. The file on Procedure 110 Montauk is a lie of omission, and a lie of omission is still a lie, and the Foundation has enough of those already. We did not save the world from the Crimson Daughter. We simply took over their duties. We have become the unwitting inheritors of their ritual, more efficient, more clinical, but no less monstrous. They sought to birth a king of darkness through suffering. We use that same suffering to keep him in his prison of flesh. It's a subtle distinction, one that we use to help us sleep at night, but I suspect it is a distinction that will not matter at all on Judgment Day. We have become what we beheld, and the most terrifying secret of all, the one I have never spoken aloud, is that I believe the procedure is failing, not all at once, but slowly, incrementally. The entity is adapting. The required intensity of the procedure has had to be increased 3 times over the last decade. The safe periods between procedures are getting shorter. We are in an arms race with a god fetus, and we are losing. We are merely running out of horrors to inflict before the final one is inflicted upon us. The containment chamber is not a prison, it's an incubator, and our procedure is not a lock. It is merely a way to slow down the gestation. But nothing, not even the Foundation, can stop a birth forever. We are not preventing the apocalypse. We are just ensuring that when it comes, it will have been preceded by decades of the most calculated, intimate, and soul-destroying cruelty imaginable. And that, my successor, is the truth of SCP-231. That is the legacy you now inherit. The evolution of the Montauk Doctrine was not just about hardware and protocols. It was about managing the human wreckage. We developed the Montauk Rotation, a system limiting any single staff member to a 3-month tour of duty, followed by 6 months of psychological rebuilding and amnestic therapy. We created profiles, identifying the personality types best suited for the work, not psychopaths. They lacked the necessary empathy to generate the right kind of intent, but individuals with immense guilt complexes, those already predisposed to believing they deserve to suffer. We weaponized their personal demons for the good of mankind. We also constructed a veil of ignorance within the Foundation itself. Only those with level 5231 clearance know the true nature of Procedure 110 Montauk. For everyone else, including the guards stationed in the outer corridors of her containment wing, the official story is that Montauk is a complex series of prayers and ancient rites performed to placate a vengeful deity. We let them believe it is a matter of faith and superstition. It is a kinder lie, one that allows them to perform their duties without sharing in the full, crushing weight of the truth. It is a necessary hypocrisy. Her containment wing is effectively a separate facility, a black site buried within a black site. It has its own power source, its own life support, and its own dedicated task force, MF Sigma 2. The Shepherds, their sole purpose is the execution of the procedure and the management of SCP-231-7's immediate containment. They are forbidden from interacting with general site staff. They live, work, and ultimately break in total isolation. We have contained the truth as rigorously as we have contained the girl, because we learned that the idea of Montauk is almost as dangerous as the entity itself. The search for a better way continued, of course, fueled by a desperate hope. We explored using other anomalies to counteract her. For a time, we considered exposing her to SCP-999, the tickle monster, hoping its overwhelming euphoria could pacify the entity. The proposal was rejected after a simulation predicted a 99.8% chance of a joyful apocalypse, where the entity, supercharged by the positive energy, would emerge and remake the world into a beautiful, screaming, ecstatic hell. Every path we explored seemed to lead to a different flavor of doom. This series of failures led to the formalization of our emergency protocols. What to do on the day the music stops. What happens when procedure 110 Montauk is missed? We have it mapped out, second by second. A 24-hour lapse is designated a Crimson Dawn event. The first signs are localized. The sky above the facility turns a deep, bruised red, and all water within a 5-kilometer radius transmutes into high salinity human blood. All personnel, without mimetic shielding, are overcome with an urge to commit acts of violent worship. If a 24-hour breach occurs, the site director is authorized to enact Protocol Abaddon. This immediately detonates the on-site nuclear warhead, not with the intention of killing the entity, but of burying it under a mountain of molten rock and glass, hopefully buying the rest of the world a few more hours or days. It is a sacrificial gesture. The entire site and its personnel offered up as a final, desperate speed bump on the road to Armageddon. All O5 council members are to be immediately evacuated to Command L01 on the moon. If Protocol Abaddon fails, or if a 48-hour lapse is reached, we enter the Seven Brides scenario. This signals the birth is imminent and irreversible. We expect global phenomena, tectonic plates grinding like teeth, tsunamis washing over coastlines, and the spontaneous manifestation of 7 new Keter-class entities across the globe, the titular brides or heralds of the king's arrival. This is the point where the Foundation's mission shifts from containment to salvage. We abandon the Earth and focus on preserving a remnant of humanity. But there is one final protocol, a measure so extreme, so contrary to our purpose, that its existence is known only to the O5 Council and a single, designated, failsafe AI. It is not a weapon to kill the entity. We know we cannot. It is a weapon aimed at reality itself. We call it Protocol Lethe. It is to be enacted only in the event that the birth is complete and the entity's influence threatens to spread beyond our solar system, consuming everything. It is our final, spiteful act. Protocol Lethe is not an act of war. It is an act of conceptual erasure. It involves synchronizing every reality-altering anomaly in our possession, from SCP-2000 to the more esoteric, unclassified objects, and turning them inward. The goal is not to reset humanity to a previous state. The goal is to perform surgery on the human condition itself. We would reboot civilization with one fundamental concept excised from the collective unconscious, the concept of motherhood, of gestation, of birth. Imagine a new humanity rebuilt from the ashes by SCP-2000, but one where the idea of carrying a child to term is an alien, impossible concept, a species that can no longer serve as a vessel. We would create a sterile reality, a world where the Scarlet King's seed can find no purchase, no womb to fester in. Humanity would survive, but as a hollowed-out, broken version of itself, forever severed from one of its most fundamental drives. It is the ultimate Pyrrhic victory, saving the game by corrupting the source code. This is the precipice upon which we live every single day. We are one missed procedure, one broken piece of equipment, one moment of human failure away from activating a cascade that ends with either global annihilation or the conceptual mutilation of our entire species. This is the true weight of SCP-231, not the monster in the cell, but the terrible choices she forces us to make. She is the living embodiment of the axiom that there are fates far worse than death. And I grow so very tired. I have sat in this chair for 50 years and have watched the light of the world dim, kept alive only by the foulest of fuels. I have signed death warrants and authorized atrocities, all in the name of a greater good that feels more distant with each passing day. The lines on my face are a map of compromises. The tremor in my hands is a memory of the horrors I have sanctioned. I am no longer a guardian. I am a monster keeper, and the distinction has long since ceased to matter. I have lied to my staff, to my fellow council members, and in this very recording, I told you we defeated the Crimson Daughter cult in that barn. I told you we recovered their texts and deciphered their rituals. This was not the complete truth. It was another necessary lie, one I have held on to for decades. We did not simply defeat them. We did not wipe them out. We did something far worse, something far more pragmatic. We absorbed them. The initial chaos of containment, the failure of our science to comprehend the theological mechanics at play, forced our hand. We could not understand the rules of the game we were forced to play, but they did. The leaders of the Crimson Daughter, the very high priests who orchestrated the kidnappings and the rituals, they understood. So we captured them, not as prisoners to be punished, but as assets to be exploited. They are held in the deepest, most secret part of Site-01, designated only as the Cognito-Hazardous Advisory Committee. They are the ones who helped us refine Montauk. They are the ones who explained the necessity of intent, the mechanics of appeasement through suffering, the symbolic meanings we were blind to. We use their profane knowledge, their dark faith, to guide our hand. The Foundation's most critical containment procedure is being co-authored in real time by the very madmen who created the threat. They are our consultants from hell. Their continued existence, a stain on everything we claim to be. This is the final, ugly secret. The Foundation did not win. We co-opted the evil. We made a deal with the devils because we were too arrogant to admit that their magic was stronger than our science. We are not their antithesis. We are their successors. We carry on their work under our own banner with our own justification. But the ritual is the same. The suffering is the same. And the God they worship is the one we now hold at bay, using their own twisted gospel as our guide. I do not know what this makes me. I only know that the lie must end. You, my successor, must know the true foundation upon which this facility is built. It is not built on reason or logic. It is built on a pact with darkness, a compromise so profound that it calls into question our entire mission. We contained the monster, yes, but in doing so, we handed the keys to the asylum over to the inmates. My time is over. The slow poison I took an hour ago is beginning its work. It is a peaceful, painless end, a mercy I have denied to so many. I leave this burden to you now, the girl in the cell, the team performing the procedure, and the council of monsters in the basement who tell us how to do it. This is your inheritance. This is your foundation. I hope you can stomach it better than I could. Secure, contain, protect. What a joke.